Lockhart Perspective. Well, there is a Canadian city that passed a bylaw threatening churches, and there is some tie to the property taxes. And I think they're having a bit of a fit. This was on the 27th that this story was published. And it goes on to say that a city in Canada scheduled to have its visit from Pope Francis recently passed a bylaw that may soon require churches to pay property taxes and a move that some consider anti religious. The city of Lockhart, what it looks like there, the capital of the province of Nunavut, don't know how to say that either, with a population of around 7,500 people, passed a bylaw in April regarding tax relief for nonprofits and charitable organizations. The new bylaw, slated to take effect next year, repeals earlier bylaws that named specific religious entities for tax exemption. And it, hey, come on out the kitchen, baby. Just go to bed. I'll look over that. Oh, 3, 2, 1. Lockhart Perspective. Well, it looks like there's a lot of scuttlebutt out here in Canada. There is a city that passed a bylaw that threatened churches with property tax relief. Apparently, this church is going to have a big papal visit, and they sort of threw this out there in the works. So, anyway, a city in Canada scheduled to have a visit from Pope Francis recently passed a bylaw that may soon require churches to pay property taxes and a move that some consider anti religious. The city of Lockhart, the capital of the province Nunavut, with a population of about 7,500 people, passed a bylaw in April regarding tax relief for nonprofits and charitable organizations. The new bylaw, slated to take effect next year, repeals earlier bylaws that name specific religious entities for tax exemption and creates an application process if a nonprofit seeks partial or complete tax exemption. Tax exemption eligibility requirements include the applicant demonstrating financial need, that they own the property for which they seek relief, and that they must not disparage or restrict others. Now, that's a quote. According to the new bylaw, the city will also cap the annual funds allocated for property tax relief to $300,000. Father Daniel Perillo, the pastor of Our Lady of Assumption, the only Catholic church in Laquelle, or I think it's Laquelo, denounced the new measure in an interview with Global News earlier this week. Quote, "It is unfair. It is a kind of revenge. It's a kind of a game," said Perillo. "It is not to kill us. It will not kill us," he says, "but it's just one more thing to make us suffer a little bit more," close quote. The city sent a statement to Global News saying the new bylaw is meant to provide a fair opportunity to all community based organizations to apply for full or partial property relief tax or tax relief, and was not a bylaw specific to the church. The news of the taxation measurement comes as Pope Francis is scheduled to visit the city on Friday as a part of his, I think it says, penitential trip to Canada, penitential trip to Canada in response to revelations of abuse at the Catholic-run residential schools for Indigenous populations. Yeah, they should have did something about that, and I do mean seriously did something about it. Anyway, it goes on to say that last year, there were 215 graves of Indigenous children that were discovered on the property of the Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia, which closed in 1978. Soon after, an alleged mass grave near the former Maryvale Indian Residential School in Saskatchewan, which had over 700 unmarked graves, made headlines. In June of 2021, the mayor of the city, that I cannot say, Kenny Bell, stated that he wanted local churches to pay taxes in response to the then recent discovery of purported mass graves at former residential schools. Quote, we're not retaliating against them. They literally killed thousands of children, Bell alleged in an interview with the Nunastik News at the time. Quote, tax exemptions as a whole are supposed to be for groups that do community good. And it's very clear that the Catholic Church hasn't done the community any good. Wow. Some scholars have disputed the claims of mass graves, noting that the Maryval was part of an official cemetery and Kamloops had only been confirmed as having probable burials. Hmm, probably. Not seriously, just probably. What do you think about that? Huh? What do you think about that? Well, we're going to take a look at the next couple of stories here. I just think that, yeah, well, right now, Canada's doing a lot. I'll just leave that there. Canada is doing a whole lot. Now, let's see, the Pope. Now, this was on the 26th. Let's see how his thing went. So it says Pope meets with the Native American leaders and apologizes for Canadian residential school abuses. Those are not any Indians I've seen. They look just as much as Indian as he does. Well, let's just go on. Pope Francis apologized to Indigenous communities in Canada for the abuses at government supported Catholic residential schools as he met with Native American leaders on Monday. As a part of his official trip to Canada, the pontiff addressed representatives of Native American tribes in Canada, including many survivors of the residential school abuses. Quote, I am here because the first step of my penitential pilgrimage among you is that is that of again asking for forgiveness, of telling you once more that I am deeply sorry, stated the Pope, who issued an initial apology earlier this year. Quote, I ask for forgiveness in particular for the ways in which many members of the church and other religious communities cooperated, not at least, he goes, not least through their indifference. Okay? Not least through their indifference. The projects of cultural destruction and forced assimilation prompt yeah, right. That's true. They did push everybody to accept that whole, Catholic thing and everything that follows it. And I do mean everything that follows it. And the forced assimilation promoted by the governments of the time. Shouldn't even say of the time if you decided to go there and stand up. So just let it go. Of that time, which culminated in the system of residential schools. While Francis noted that Christian charity was not absent in the residential school system, Christian charity, I love to point this out, they know who they are. I think there's a lot of Christians who don't know they're Catholic. But anyway, let's go. Or Baptists or any of the other stuff that goes along with being Christians today. Let's finish. While Francis noted that Christian charity was not absent in the residential school system and that there were many outstanding instances of devotion and care for children, he concluded that the overall effects of the policies linked to the residential schools were catastrophic. What our Christian faith tells us is that this was a disastrous error, incompatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ, he continues. It is painful to think of how the firm soil of values, language, and culture that made up the authentic identity of your peoples was eroded, and that you have continued to pay the price of this. Closed quote. The pontiff also said that he considered the apology to not be the end of the matter, but rather the starting point, which will include a serious investigation into the facts of what took place in the past and to assess the survivors of the residential schools to experience the healing from the traumas that they suffered, close quote. Francis's trip to Canada came in response to a recent revelation of abuse at the Catholic schools as they were tied to Canada's residential school system, including reported discovery of the mass graves. Again, last year, 215 graves of Indigenous children were discovered on the property of Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia, which closed in 1978. For headlines with a voice and the Lockhart perspective, this is Felicia Lockhart.
Lockhart Perspective.